Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our report back session with our delegates. And just for everybody to remember, the delegation we had on this past January 2026 was Intergenerational Global Solidarity and Social Justice, a Cuban perspective. And next slide, please. And for everybody to remember, as Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective, we are building transnational grassroots solidarity connections to resist violence, poverty, and oppression in the US and Latin America and the Caribbean. And in this session, also, we would like to share our values that are part of what we do here in Cuba and in other countries. And our speakers tonight are three wonderful McAllister students.
McAllister.
Okay, before that, before that, it's fine. We have three wonderful McAllister students that are going to share a little bit about their experience and their life and their time here in Cuba. 10 exciting but exhausting days. So we have divided the different topics that we shared on the delegation. So Guillermo Muñoz Calanche, you see his picture in the middle. He's going to share about intergenerationality. Damaris Zamora is going to share about global global solidarity, and Sky Raymond on the left of your screen is going to share about social justice. So we welcome to the mic Guillermo, who's going to share a bit about his experience first.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to report back to you what our delegation did in Cuba. It was, again, such a privilege. We're really grateful on behalf of Damaris and Sky and the rest of our McAllister cohort that we were able to be given that opportunity via Witness for Peace to visit Cuba. And yeah, kicking us off with one of the major themes for our cohort was this theme of intergenerational solidarity. And so this was seen, although like Feli mentioned, it was a jam-packed itinerary and schedule of meetings with a plethora of so many beautiful people-run organizations. Today we'll be highlighting just a couple for which really encapsulate this concept of intergenerational solidarity. Next slide, please. The first organization that we want to highlight today is La Muñeca Negra, which is the Black Doll Project. And for some context, this organization was founded in 1980 to forward community service, social responsibility, and economic mobility, but especially for women through doll making, art, and environmental conscious practices. It was also founded by sculptor and artist Margarita Montalvo, who you can actually see there is pictured signing one of her amazing artworks for McAllister students. And Maritza Arango Montalvo, her niece, is also the project's coordinator. Maritza specifically and eloquently described to our cohort that when the organization speaks of empowerment work for Black women in Cuba, they emphasize the fact that empowerment cannot solely be economic empowerment. It also has to be political and cultural. And so the work of La Muñeca Negra is grounded from Margarita Montalvo's days as a young girl living under the US-backed Batista regime. She recalls the lack of Black dolls and overall lack of appreciation that Cuban society held towards Black women. Yet in the aftermath of the socialist revolution of 1959, Margarita was finally able to engage with her art and education leading her on a path towards creating her own organization dedicated towards highlighting Black beauty, and has in turn cemented her role as a mentor within her community. And her leadership has paved the way for many of her pupils to become nationally and internationally recognized for their art. And La Muñeca Negra presently encapsulates the theme of what intergenerational solidarity really looks like in action. Some clear examples within this organization included sessions every Sunday, where elders from the community and youth come together to drink a powerful tea that is medicinal. And the purpose of these sessions is to provide elderly folks from the community with nutritional teas that can assist with easing nerves and high blood pressure. But above all, these sessions are meant to foment a feeling of community intergenerational solidarity by giving young people and elders a space and time to engage with one another. Next slide, please. La Muñeca Negra is also the mother project, which has allowed for other projects to sprout from, such as that of the Afropoderosas, which have assisted young Black women with empowerment and educational workshops surrounding their bodies, consent, and menstruation. Additionally, the organization also has deep connections with primary schools in their community, seeking to connect with the youth as early as possible. The organization's leaders are trained by popular educators from El Centro Martin Luther King, which served as the hub and space where we resided in. And engaging in popular education for La Muñeca Negra's leaders is the path their community takes to bond, establish solidarity, and is also the path for their community to learn and unlearn systems of domination. Next slide, please. Another great experience that we were able to have and an engagement that we were able to have with another community in Cuba was in El Rincón de los Milagros, which is the Association of Haitian Descendants in Cuba. And so this is a space dedicated to, of course, preserving the Haitian heritage of Afro-Cubanos. And as we learned through community members within this space, Cuba has had a long and robust history of connection to Haiti, where during the early years of the 20th century, Haitian immigrants, prior to the socialist revolution, worked as braceros within sugarcane plantations. And their role in the economy of Cuba was never fully recognized under the capitalist regimes, especially during the Batista dictatorship. It indeed was not until, of course, the success of the socialist revolution in 1959, where the movement formally granted all Haitian braceros citizens of the nation, finally able to reap the benefits of their country's socialist economy. And El Rincón de los Milagros as a space originally began on street corners. If you could go to the next slide, please, so that folks could see, where teachers, artists, and historians with Haitian heritage could teach younger generations, both young and old, about how to be proud about their Haitian lineage. Yet inevitably over this time and this model of workshops, teach-in sessions and popular education sessions were consistently at risk of being disrupted due to the consistent traffic seen on the streets there in the photo. This, of course, led to the Association of Haitian Descendants to formally request a space through the Cuban government to prevent any potential accidents for their community members. Next slide, please. Additionally, through the help of the MLK Center and other networks, the popular educators within El Rincón de los Cielos have received support in educating young Afro-Cuban children on their Haitian history and mother tongue, a salient practice given the fact that Haitian Creole is the second most spoken language in Cuba. Next slide, please. We concluded our visit to El Rincón de los Milagros dancing rumba, and afterwards had the opportunity to converse with elders from the community on their participation within the Cuban Revolution. Next slide, please. And that's, of course, a photo of us dancing rumba. Next slide, please. On day 5 of our trip, we had traveled also to the coastal city of Trinidad, where we met with popular educators from the University of Cienfuegos at La Casona de Toqui. which is a cultural center and museum centered around using a large estate for sessions and workshops on feminism, environmental concerns, and social organizing. The casona could be described as a magical space, akin to that of a Studio Ghibli film. Many animals greeted us throughout the tour of our home, such as a mule or a playful Mexican hairless dog, which you can see in the next slide. On the next one, I apologize. The large estate also had a fully functioning pond with a waterfall with healthy koi fish swimming in it. And Ana Maria Salas explained that she had, of course, begun her career in theater, eventually moving to Ecuador during its authoritarian regime. And throughout her time there, she had effectively organized students to use theater and art and popular education as a means of transgressing Ecuador's fascism. In some moments, she herself was even jailed. Eventually, years later, she was approached with the opportunity to create a televised children's show, and it was here through which she invented Toki, a young child whose imagination takes him to adventures far and beyond our own universe. And during the success of Toki, she met and, of course, married her husband in Cuba, who became the father to her children, and she continued her career in the arts and television, effectively learning or leaving and shaping positive images for children that they could carry for the rest of their lives. And if you go back to the previous slide, Juan Carlos, who was one of our wonderful guides, specifically was quoted with saying that he grew up with that show and that he remembers his generation specifically watching that and being touched by the legacy, which was, of course, created by the wonderful Ana Maria Salas. And upon retiring, Ana Maria Salas, while living in Trinidad, had witnessed hurricane after hurricane destroy many seaside homes. And with the state of Cuba, thanks to the embargo, being left to neglect these seaside estates, she requested herself to buy one and renovate it as a cultural hub, naming it, of course, after Toki. And rather than use the estate for herself, she consistently hosts youth events and popular educational sessions where everyone can relish the views of the seaside as they organize and theorize as to how to better their own communities. And she, of course, was quoted as saying, "The point of life is to share it. If not, then where's the fun in that?" And so, above all else, Ana Maria Salas, with her comrades by her side, reminded our cohort, our group, that within the social process that we call revolution, centering joy and play is essential. Thank you. That concludes my part of intergenerational solidarity. I'll pass it on to Damaris.
Hi, everybody. My name is Damaris, and I'm a current senior at Macalester College, where I am studying international studies with a minor in Latin American studies. So I had the immense privilege to come and do this delegation to Cuba. And, just to kind of like pick it off, if we can go to the next slide, one of the pillars of going into Witness for Peace and one of the great things that we can do is have star time, which is our dedicated debrief time. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about this during our global solidarity portion, because I think part of doing these delegations to Cuba is that whoever is coming is also having like a reasonable and a sound understanding of where the space that they're being in, and just being capsuled in the time of like where they're being able to go to one community center to another and being able to learn from all these different community members, but then actually have a dedicated space time to talk about what they've learned and talk about the perspectives that they have now gained from going to these amazing trips and meeting these amazing community members. So these are just like sort of like some pictures from our times where we were able to like talk to other people in our group, because oftentimes we do a lot of listening and it's always good to just have a little debrief. So we can go on to the next slide. I want to just talk about two very key moments where I felt the immense global solidarity that Cuba gives to not only just the surrounding communities, but also specifically to Africa. We went to Casa Africa, which is a African museum in Cuba. And one of the amazing things that I learned, and just some of the things that even just like made me reflect on all the other experiences and all the other museums that I have ever gone to in my life, is that every single artifact that was in that museum that we saw was gifted by an African nation. None of these artifacts were stolen, they were all gifted, and they're gifted because they saw the solidarity and they saw how much Cuba was willing to just give it all for African liberation and for these African countries. And just, something that really like was brought into my attention is that, growing up in the US and going to Western institutions and then sort of like being told to go to other Western institutions to study abroad in, one of the things that I had the privilege of doing was doing an art history course in London. And one of the very spaces that you go to is the British Museum, and just seeing the whole entire like Africa like section in London, and just knowing that everything was stolen and taken by force and like just forged out of people's like hands and livelihoods, just gave me this super unique perspective to come into hearing Cuba and witnessing how instead it was an opposite thing where like, oh my God, like everything was just gifted to them for one and another reason. And another thing that we also had the extreme privilege of doing was meeting a former soldier who fought in the Angola War. And for many of you, you might not know, why were Cubans in the Angola War? So the Angolan government had requested military assistance from the Cuban government after Portugal withdrew without a formal handover of power, causing Angola to erupt into a civil war. And while there's three major movements within Angola to seek control, the People's Movement for Liberation of Angola specifically requested help from Cuba. And this assistance from Cuba would lead for key battles to be won against invading Western forces, such as the apartheid South Africa paramilitaries. As the MPLA would prove successful in these battles, the outrage within South Africa over the defeat and the involvement within Angola would be one of the key conditions for the beginnings of the end of the apartheid regime within South Africa. And something that, it's one thing to just learn this in a history book, and then it's another to actually be able to talk to a veteran and get his perspective about, like going into a foreign land and soil and, fighting for a country that is not your own. But he had specifically said to us that like part of his journey in like fighting for the Angola War was that like he knew that it was necessary for this African country's liberation from Western powers. He saw the solidarity, and it's what helped him continue on and gave him a lot of like morale and even national pride in Cuba, because he knew that his country was fighting for African liberation. And it's just one of the many gifts that Cuba gives us. And if you can go on to the next slide, I wanted to just talk about briefly as well more of the many gifts that Cuba has given to the international community. If you can see over in the down picture, like the bottom picture, Elier Ramirez is a well-respected scholar within Cuba on the history of US-Cuban relations and currently serves as the director for the Fidel Castro Research Center. And throughout our group's conversations with Elier, he spoke to us about the many myths held by the United States with regards to Cuban social and civil life, and that we hope to demystify a little. Elier's first dismissal of these common held myths by the US toward Cubans is the fact that the tense relations between the two countries began after the success of the revolution. He nonetheless reminds us that in 1901, the Platt Amendment, which was signed by Congress as a measure to establish the Guantanamo Bay and effectively set the stage for a paternalistic relationship between the US and Cuba. And after a crash course in Cuban-US relations, one of our peers had then asked Eliot how he envisioned an ideal future where there was a normalization of relations between these two nation states. And it was at here where Eliot had kind of taken a pause, and he mentioned that that question made him very emotional. He elaborated by explaining that during the COVID-19 pandemic, Cuba had the intentions of purchasing a US-made vaccine, such as Pfizer. Yet the Trump regime at that time had denied them the opportunity to do so. and it left them to fend off against their own for COVID. Despite being strangled by the US economically and politically and having to face the tremendous hurdle of having no access to a vaccine, Cuban researchers got to work. And the Cuban researchers developed 3 different vaccines and even creating a pill that could be ingested for younger people and minors. After having verified them as effective against the disease, Cubans had then began to receive vaccinations, and Cuba additionally extended their innovative vaccines to parts of Mexico and in Latin America. Once they had seen how successful their vaccines were, they decided to place them on the market in order to be acquired by some semblance of profit for their labor. Yet they were still denied the opportunity by the US and other Western imperialist countries. So when he returned to the question of what he envisioned, a place where Cuba, under a normalization of relations with the US, it had made all of us emotional due to the decades of the repression of his country had faced and how they've still managed to survive and advance in their society. He had said, quote, "I wonder just how much Cuban people could have provided to humanity in a positive manner if the economic warfare was replaced with more pacifistic relation and a relational dynamic grounded in Cuban principles of respect and sovereignty." And I think one of these things that I sort of like gathered from this conversation that we had was just specifically about how much Cuba has had to struggle and do everything on their own. And despite that, still giving back to the community, the international community around them. And that is just something that, like we don't see elsewhere. And it's something that we see specifically with Cuba. And this is also furthered as well with a Cuban doctor that we met, Wilfer Reyes, who is a specialist in general medicine and public health. And accompanying him was a medical student from Kansas. Her name was Katie Kirby, who, just like us, the Macalester students, had visited Cuba in solidarity years prior and was so moved by her journey to go to Cuba and decided to formally attend the Latin American School of Medicine, which resides in Havana. And just for some brief context on the LATAM School of Medicine, this institution has been described as possibly being the largest medical school in the world by enrollment, with approximate 19,550 students from across 110 countries, as reported in 2012. International students mainly come from Latin America and the Caribbean, but also from Africa and Asia. And the school accepts students from the United States. Annually, the program receives around 150 applications on average, of which around 30 enroll and 10 will actually travel to Cuba. All tuition, room, and board are free, and a small stipend is provided for these students. Dr. Reyes was dedicated to running a free pharmacy drugstore that provides care to Cuban people who are ill. Medicine drugs are supplied through the help of a robust network of organizations that the Centro Martin Luther King has built over the years, as well as in collaboration with aid provided by foreign countries. Their pharmacy, which has been driven largely by Christian values of love and solidarity, service roughly around 100 people daily. And additionally, the pharmacy also has an on-site pediatrician and nurse practitioner. One of the things that he had said to us during our discussion in our Q&A was that the essence of Cubans is found in the desire to share resources. It is found in our desire as people to share knowledge, faith, and love. He had then added and concluded by asserting that people might see us as crazy, yet we welcome you to join in our madness. And it's just something that's so rich about the Cuban solidarity within the whole international community is that despite all odds, they do so much for all of us. If you can go on to the next slide. So what are we seeing in our meeting today? I feel like coming back from Cuba, there has been a lot of different things that we've seen in news outlets, and it has reflected very differently from what our time in Cuba has been. So I really ponder for all of us to just sit back and not only just look at resources and sources outside of Western news outlets, but to look beyond and to also look at other journalists and independent journalists and journalists from Latin America to talk about Latin America. if you can go on to the next slide. And I sort of conclude with this global solidarity portion is that we need to ultimately reframe this narrative as not just simply an embargo or a tax or a sanction, but rather it's an economic warfare that the Cuban people are struggling with. And so if we're truly trying to trying to go on to global solidarity, we should try joining anti-war movements and organizations that can put pressure on our senators and reps. It's not just simply enough to just call them and put that pressure, but it's also important to organize with the communities around you. And I really do encourage everybody to do that deeper bit of research and try to see how you can support the Cuban people locally as well. And I give back my time and I'll give it off to Sky.
Cool. So I would be talking about social justice in a way that's also intertwined with student activism because that was my role that I went into while I was there. This is a picture here of while we were at the Che Guevara Memorial. And I think these were all like letters that he had written to Fidel when like before he died. And then you can go to the next slide. So, and then I think I forget what day this was on, but we went to El Menunje, which is a community cultural space dedicated to uplifting LGBTQ youth. And at this place, they do this through art, music, and community organizing and popular education workshops. This place is a very vibrant place. You can see here, like the workers were, having fun just talking to us about everything. And then we had a little performance from one of the people there. He was a rapper in Cuba, which is really cool to experience. And Minuje is one of Minuje's biggest events is the red carpet drag show, where the local municipality shows off sections off main roads near Minuje to have young artists showcase their talents on a red carpet. Then it leads them to the community center, and this space was very welcoming to all of us. This is kind of like one of the only spaces there where it was designated specifically for LGBTQ people, and social justice in that way. And so like the whole trip, we learned things about social justice, but this was felt very targeted towards a certain group of people, which I thought was really cool. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, yeah, so this one, student activism, and I want to talk about the power to feel and empathize. So I took all the photos on this trip, the photos that you've been seeing in these slides. And for me, it was something that changed the way that I thought about student activism. I always took photos as like a personal thing and somebody to pass the time. But then it became so much more than just a personal hobby on this trip. And it felt like something that I could use through social justice and my own student activism. I'm a media and cultural studies major, so I already want to, create videos in media in the future as a job. And so this was like a perfect way for me to feel like I have a purpose and that something that's just like taking photos is more than just taking a photo, that this transcends into a different space. And it created the opportunity to empower me, and I feel like other people and can be very empowered through this trip to use their voice to create change, because not a lot of people go to Cuba and have the similar experiences that we've had, and then get to come back and share that with people is one of the best things that we can do. And this made me feel like I have a bigger voice than I thought I had, because I have all these photos that show the time that we were there and people can see with their own eyes, not some like headline in the news, but someone's actual experience from going there. And you can see in one of the photos, it's me, one of the other students at the Black Doll Project, with things that we bought for our own personal things. You can actually see in my background, that's the pig that I bought in that picture. Everything is on my shelf. There's also the bongos that I bought there and the fan. It's just hanging up there. But that was really great. And on another less happy note, in the top right corner is we went to a plantation, a sugar plantation, and that was something that was really emotional for a lot of us. It was very different experience to see plantations in a different country where like the slavery wasn't as inherently like tied into the US slavery, but it was still connected in a different way. And that was like really weird and emotional to see, but also like that's something that like I will carry with me, and like I have these photos to remind me, and then like not let the memories just go away as something that happened. But every time I look at these photos and we talk about things, it comes back that Cuba's a place, there are people there, and sometimes we want to put things off in our mind like that doesn't exist because it's hard to think about, but this place exists. And the photo on the bottom is of a river, and I think it was in Santa Clara that it had a bunch of trash in it, and that was something that like it really hit me hard, because there's so many beautiful things in Cuba. Of course, there's beautiful things everywhere, but you know there was just this moment where I realized that trash is something that people don't really think a lot about, and it connects with not having oil in the country because things are banned. But then also, like, the oil contributes to people not having oil to run trash trucks and then having them pick up trash. And so trash has commonly left on the streets, or as in this case, left in the river. And that is something that like hurts me because these communities are being impacted by things that are out of their control because it's not just sanctions, it's an entire blockade on the country to receive essential resources. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so in this way, I was saying the power to feel works in a different way than just making you feel something that's difficult, but also making you feel something that's happy and joyful. This is, as Kieran was talking about earlier, um, the place where the Haitian people in Cuba, they're dancing and celebrating. And in this photo, like I feel like I could really feel the joy that everyone was feeling. Some of our students had Haitian ancestry, and so they really connected with that experience. And then getting to see, on the right, you can see one of the elders like holding on to one of the Haitian students. It was really just like such a touching moment. And then to capture that just shows so much more than, it's just two people, but it's a historical, generational connection, and you can feel that in a photo. And I feel like I was so grateful to have the experience to then take these moments and translate them into a different time, different space, and still feel that same thing and show others that feelings are okay. And even though it hurts a lot to feel things for these terrible things happening to other countries, but feelings are what keep us human and what keep us to empathize and care about other countries. And so photography is a great way to translate that. And you go to the next slide. In that way, I also thought of the power to see people, which is something that, I don't think any of these people necessarily thought of me taking pictures and then this being sent back when I go back to the United States and having these photos in a slideshow and having these photos at my school and all those things. All these people, I don't think they thought about any of those things when they saw me taking a picture of them, which I find really interesting because photography has this power to see people through this one lens for a short amount of time, but then that is existing forever. And all the joy that exists in these moments, and that people are people. And I feel like that's something that a lot of people forget when these things are going on, but these are real people and they have real lives and feelings and they have joy. And of course, horrible things are happening in these countries, but joy exists. And sometimes we forget that. And so I love to show that joy existed in these places. You can go to the next slide. And then on that same vein, I wanted to talk about seeing beauty because joy, lovely, see, but beauty also exists in a way that people think it's, poor and dirty and things like that. But these are like narratives that other places like the United States likes to put out so that we don't have any interest in going to Cuba or thinking about how it's a better option to be in than the United States. But Cuba has such a natural beauty in itself as a beautiful physical terrain, but also in the people. And that's the sort of thing that like you can't really replicate in other areas where harm is being constantly done. But here, the Cuban people, they found that beauty and joy in themselves with the lack of money and the lack of resources. They found another way to keep that spirit alive. And you can just see it in little kids dancing in the streets in the sun and in the classic Cuban cars in the sunset. And that was something where like, I just took a moment to pause and look around and be like, whoa, this is a really beautiful place, and I'm really privileged to be in this really beautiful place. And photography can take people there mentally for a second to be like, wow, that's an experience. That's a place where joy and happiness exists and hardships exist, but we can do things to prevent that and acknowledge that these are good places with good people and good things. That's it for my section. You can go to the next slide.
And thank you so much for that, Sky. That was really eloquently and beautifully said. And as we begin to conclude our presentation today, our specific McAllister cohort wanted to leave you all, but also specifically those who on this call or who may be listening in the future on YouTube, those who are specifically situated within a university context or a higher education context, on the ways that we can all presently stand in solidarity with the Cuban people, despite the current repression our communities have been facing in what we reference as the imperial core that is the United States. Our group specifically has no intention of only imploring you all to simply call or email your representatives. And whilst those actions, of course, are important, they are, again, truly the last thing that our group would want to inspire you to do with regards to solidarity practices, not just in Cuba, but anywhere across the board. Ultimately, as our cohort witnessed within Cuba and wishes to emphasize, it's that popular education, when used to address hyper-local needs, is one of the most effective strategies towards transgressing fascism and building political power. And popular education, for a little bit of more context, it's a tool through which folks of all ages, in a non-hierarchical way, can come together to discuss issues that are materially affecting them, and pushes them to look at their situation through one, a historical, and secondly, through an internationalist lens. And as seen through the examples of El Centro Martin Luther King, which trains and holds space for communities in Havana and beyond, we here in the United States ought to follow suit. We should draw upon the works of popular educators like Paulo Freire, who also inspired popular educators like bell hooks to foment those conversations amongst our neighbors and build spaces for popular education. But of course, all of us here, we assert that fully cognizant of the fact that some of us here today may be situated within a university context. And although popular education should be incorporated into our solidarity work, we remind everyone here today that when we use that strategy, it is most effective outside of the university context. All of us here today, when discerning how solidarity looks for us, should heed to the warnings of Robin D.G. Kelley, who lays out that the university, despite being a tremendously important site of struggle, is ultimately not the site through which true social transformation will take place. Such a desire that we have for us to change material conditions and to change the values of American society requires a bottom-up approach where political education is emphasized with the intention of meeting people's everyday needs and linking their community's struggles with that of the struggles that Cubans face and other oppressed groups face. And so with that, that is our call to action, is for those who live in the imperial core, who are your neighbors? Who are you conversing with outside of the university context, if you are within higher education, to begin fomenting and building political power, such as the ways in which El Centro and other organized groups within Cuba that we ourselves saw are currently doing in order to fend off American imperialist fascism. And so thank you. That concludes our section. We'll pass it off to Feli and Jessica. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Sky, Damaris, Guillermo. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, also for sharing your passion and your heart with all this you have shared. I'm so sorry. Before we go to questions, I'm so sorry. I forgot I had a little part within this presentation and was talking about the Martin Luther King Center, or El Centro Martin Luther King, that you might ask like what it is that Guillermo and Damaris and Sky have talked about. But El Centro Martin Luther King is our main friend partner organization as Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective that has worked with us through about more than 30 years and is a grassroots Cuban organization that is working for over 40 different towns or cities around Cuba and has different projects, and their, let's say, their line of work goes through two different branches, which is their main branch as popular education network and their second branch as a popular theology and theology of liberation, which is their second line. And their faith and their ways of understanding the word helps them to build a better word for the people that they work with, giving them different tools and different ideas and different ways to focus their different ideas and projects within their different organizations and groups, as the ones they shared about as La Muñeca Negra or other different projects that so nicely Guillermo, Damaris, and Sky have shared about. Now this is the time for questions, and just raise your hand or open your mic and let us know for who is going to be your question, and it's time for this. Yes, Renee.
Hello. Thank you for your presentations. Very interesting. I considered going on that delegation, and I think that went the end of January. And were all of you from McAllister, or just yes? No. And then how do you think things have changed in Cuba since you were there until now? Anyone who wants to answer?
I can go ahead and answer that. But of course, Damaris and Sky, feel free to chip in and chirp in whatever other details. But as Damaris mentioned in the chat, our delegation was around roughly 8 McAllister students, with I believe another additional 8 students from Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas. And so we were 2 different groups from 2 different states within the United States who had gone to Cuba. And as for the second portion of your question with regards to how Cuba is now after the fact, I think it's important, first and foremost, before I answer how Cuba is now, that when we were on our way to Cuba, we had arrived in Miami a day after the United States had kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. And while we were on the plane to Miami, going already, boarded and going to Cuba, we were all scrolling social media, and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, alongside Donald Trump, had been interviewed briefly by reporters, and they were both saying that Cuba was next, that Cuba was going to fall next. And so you can imagine just some of the kind of concerns that we had, but it also kind of fomented this feeling that, well, no, we have to stand now more so than anything in solidarity with Cuba. And so when we left, things have obviously, as Damaris mentioned, it's not an embargo, it's complete and utter economic warfare, essentially, or basically a strangulation with the intention of genocide against the Cuban people, specifically with the situation with petroleum. It's to my understanding that traveling to and from the country is difficult. The cost of living has tremendously skyrocketed. The conversion rate for a US dollar was 400, I believe 400 Cuban pesos when we were there, which kind of shows you the level of inflation that has occurred. But specifically with the petroleum, as of right now, in the weeks after our delegation, has made life incredibly difficult. Blackouts are rampant. And of course, I say this with the privilege of living in the Imperial Core and being back in the United States. but I would also defer to Sky and Damaris if you guys want to comment more about that, and also to Jessica and Feli, who I believe also might be in Cuba right now presently.
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well that I think like especially like during like being part of the delegation during as Guillermo was talking about in such like a hot moment, I think it also gave us like a lot of perspective as well too. Like even situating it like more like McAllister is in St. Paul, Minnesota. So everything that was going on and like Operation Ice Metro Surge was going on. The killing of Renee Good happened when we were in Cuba. And it was like so hard to like not only balance what things that were going on home, but then things that were going presently as we're in Cuba. And I will say that even as we were in Cuba, like especially when we went to Santa Clara, like a smaller like coastal city, we experienced a blackout as well too. And I say this because despite experiencing like a blackout, I think it was one of the most beautifulest moments where we could see the stars in the sky. And I think it was one of like, I don't know, it's something that I'm always gonna carry with me is like you could just hear like the music all over like the small city, and you can hear like people just kind of talking outside and having that moment to just kind of like talk to your neighbors, which is something that I rarely see in the US. And so I will say that despite there being challenges in Cuba, like it's still like a very beautiful country where like you feel absolutely safe. Like there was not a moment that I didn't feel unsafe at all. I also remember as well with Guillermo, like we ended up having a little excursion and just walking down in Havana, and like I felt so much more safe walking down the streets of Havana with like two other people than like I have in some other cities in the US. So, just to bring another perspective as well is that like despite us going at this very hot moment in history, we had an amazing trip and we experienced so much and we learned so much. And I think it even situated us in a greater context of like being able to live during this time and now being like, wow, like we literally like left Cuba at a time where like the US was doing is going to be doing and now is doing like the worst. So it was so interesting. And I will say that having another school uh from like the Midwest in Topeka, Kansas was so much fun because it was like a lot of different it was like two Midwestern schools and like probably like the most like furthest out in the north that might be going to Cuba. So I thought that was also a fun experience to have too.
Mhm. I would just I would just add to what Guillermo and Damari said that we're still doing delegations here in Cuba. We're still working. I'm actually living in Cuba right now, and it's part of what being in solidarity means, and means like seeing the reality with our own eyes. I would just add that the cost of gas and the cost of public transportation has increased like way more than double for which is like hard for Cuban people, and it's part of all this reality and all these uh, situations that we are facing here in Cuba because of the blockade and because of all the different additions, I would say, the different amends that have been done by uh, the current president of the United States. So, um, but it's not something that is just happening now. It's something that is happening for over 60 years, and it's just keep ramping one over on top of the other. Any other question?
I had a quick question. Good to see you all.
Yes.
I enjoyed the presentation. I was just curious to know, is there still a delegation plan for April? I was wanting to know about sending like supplies with people. If there's like groups that can purchase supplies and send them along.
Yes, there is a delegation going on in April, and yes, they are gathering donations as delegates. They are like being part of this. Maybe you can. Well, you know, like, well, you were with Sierra on the same delegation last May, so maybe you can contact her if
Okay.
you want to. Yeah,
Okay.
she's coming. And also with us in this call, we have Kenya, which is our April delegation coordinator.
Yeah, that was good advice that
So,
Feli gave to contact
yeah,
Sierra.
feel free to contact them.
Yeah, and then we could get in touch. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Something that you might want to add? Well, we went
Wait,
think
there's a
right in
question.
time. Oh,
There's a
yes.
question.
Go ahead, Kenya. Sorry.
I just very quickly, because I liked the presentation. It was very thorough. I don't know, what was your guys' favorite part? What was your most standout part from the trip?
I can say something. For me, it was the feeling of being comfortable. I don't really know how to like if you don't have like the exact experience I did, it's really hard to explain, but um I'm a mixed person, and being in Cuba with so many people who are mixed was like really amazing. And I joke about it all the time. We were doing salsa lessons, and we were at the bar getting some water, and the guy was speaking in Spanish before, asking us all these questions about where we're from, like what are our ethnicities, and then he asked me, and then I told him like, oh, I'm from the United States, and like I'm black and white, and he was like, me too. And it was the funniest thing to me because he was so sweet and so serious about it. And it was just like, yeah, and what about it? Like, I'm also black and white. And that was something to me like, wait, like this is a thing that like isn't weird. Like people don't look at me weird, or there's not like there's other people that are like me, and I don't feel like I'm sticking out in a specific way where I have to define myself all the time because everyone there is just like living. And I just felt so free when people thought I was Cuban, and that to me just felt like I was at ease, And whatever people say about like how the crazy things are going on in Cuba, being back here to me was more fearful than being in Cuba, especially with everything that was going on with Renee Good and ICE. I didn't want to go back to the United States. I honestly wanted to stay in Cuba and take my chances, but obviously I couldn't do that. But like I really did feel more comfortable in Cuba than like I've like racially ever felt in my life in the United States.
All
Yes,
right.
this is Don Christensen in St. Paul, my wife Rachel. We've joined this conversation and enjoyed it so much. Uh, we go to McAllister Plymouth United Church right next to McAllister campus, so we know McAllister pretty well. And I'm just so pleased to know that McAllister students have had this experience and reported on it so beautifully. I'm impressed by how much you appropriated about Cuba in such a short time. As I'm sure we are very scared right now for what may happen in Cuba. I'm sure you share those feelings also. And just wanted the McAllister students to know that there are people here in the community outside of McAllister who share a great love for Cuba and a desire to protect Cuba and liberate Cuba. And thank you for bringing this report to us tonight.
Thank you for being here, Don. That's beautiful.
All right. Any other question? Any comment? All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm impressed. Well, I'm not very impressed because I had the opportunity and the blessing to be with these three folks and some others here